He pushed me back in the car. He was hitting me, and he pulled up behind this building. It was vacant. He goes, "You can get out and run, but no one's going to see you. No one's going to hear you." And he had a gun in his hand. My name is Marlene Aguilar, and this is my story. I ended up in a relationship with the father of my 2 older children. He was very controlling, physically abusive. We started off okay in our own place, and then he was always out with other women, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And this is before we had our kids. So then I ended up going back home to live with my dad and my younger brother. My boyfriend at the time would keep calling me and tell me to come back home, and I said, I can't live that way. And he said, "Well, if you don't come back, I'm going to hurt your little brother and your dad. I need you to come back." And because of that is the reason why I went back with him, because I didn't want him to hurt my family. My dad said, "Do what you got to do." Because my dad, at the beginning, when he first met this man, right away, the first day he met him, he did not like the guy. And I should have listened, but I didn't. So I ended up going back with him, and I ended up getting pregnant with my daughter. And he said, "If you have a girl, I am leaving you. I will not stay with you." When I had Daisy, my daughter, he was just in love with her. And I thought everything was going to be okay, but yeah, it wasn't. But I ended up getting pregnant again a few months later and had my son, Eddie. And when I had Eddie, his dad would say, "That's not my kid. That's not my kid." He would deny him all the time. Like, how can you deny this child? I ended up marrying him after we had children because he needed to have, health benefits and insurance for himself. He had told me he was going to marry another woman because he needed insurance. And I go, "Well, why don't we just get married? We have children and, we live together." And so I felt like I should be the one to marry him and be with him forever and take care of him and our kids. I think I stayed for so long because I had pride. I didn't want to go back to my family and say, "Oh, I need you. But at the time, I felt I didn't need them. I just didn't want anyone to know what I was going through. I finally got the strength to leave him. We split up. Time had gone by, I would say about 3 years. Maybe my kids were about 6 and 7 years old, and I needed help financially. I asked for child support, and he didn't like that, so he asked for a paternity test. Mind you, this is 7 years later. And of course, they turn out to be his kids. And then he started wanting to be involved in their lives, and I wasn't really okay with it. I was really afraid that he was going to take them from me. But when we got together with him, Eddie was just, "Daddy this and Daddy that." I'm like, oh my God, he's going to take these kids from me. I'm going to be devastated. And, that didn't happen anyways. He ended up having a good relationship with the kids. He wanted to open up a car dealership. The catch to it was he wanted to put everything in my name. Everything, the bank accounts, the dealership, everything. And we had a little shop, and you're supposed to park your cars in the shop and sell them from the shop. And he wasn't doing that. He was actually stealing the cars and selling them on the side. Eventually it caught up to him where someone's car he stole got him in some trouble. And so we ended up in court, and I was on the witness stand, testifying against my husband. So what I ended up doing was closing that business because I had the authority to do it. He was really, really, really upset about that, like really upset. And he forced me into his car, and he said, "I'm taking you somewhere. The kids are not going with you." And I was crying. I was hysterical. I tried to get out. He pushed me back in the car. He was hitting me, and I was like, oh my God, okay, just calm down. So I calmed down. I just went with the flow. And he pulled up behind this building. It was vacant, and it was dark. And he goes, "You can get out and run, but no one's going to see you. No one's going to hear you." And he had a gun in his hand at the time. And I'm like shivering, shaking, so scared I'm going to die. I'm like, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. So we went back. I got my kids, and I took off. And I called the police, and I told them everything that happened. I ended up getting a restraining order. And as time had gone by, maybe 3 years have gone by and nothing from him. I ended up trying to reach him, and I got a hold of him and I asked him, how can you go all this time without, being around your kids? And he did say, I feel like too much time has gone by. And when he did start seeing the kids again, it would be for a day here, a day there. When I'm at work, he would keep them. Kids were really excited to be around him. They just loved being around him. I never did tell them anything bad about him. I didn't want them to have that in their heart. There was one day he was watching them. I believe it was March 30th, 2002. He watched him for a whole full 8 hours, 10 hours, and he brought him home. And I got a phone call on a Friday afternoon. I got this phone call, and my ex-husband had passed away. And I was like, wait a minute, you're lying, So I ended up calling his house, and his mother-in-law answered the phone, and I said, let me speak to Albert. And she said, he passed away. I'm like, I was devastated. So I started crying, but I didn't want my kids to see me crying. So I ran into the garage and I started screaming pretty much like, what am I going to do? How am I going to tell my kids that their dad died? So I had to explain to them that he was in a very tragic motorcycle accident. He was hit by another car, and his mom told me that when she saw him, he looked peaceful, but it was all internal. I took it very, very hard. My heart was hurting. I believe I was hurting more for my kids because they had just seen him the day before. But at the same time, thinking about it, I had this sense of relief for myself that no one was ever going to hurt me or say anything bad to me or belittle me. No more mental abuse or anything belittling. My younger brother and his wife moved in with us, and we would party at home and just hang out. And then eventually, my younger brother and his wife started going to church, and they would invite me to church, and I would say, no way, I'm not stepping in that building. There's no way, And he would just keep inviting me, and I kept saying no. And then finally I decided to go. It was a Friday Night Alive service they had. I walked in, and it was different. It was different. There was loud music. It was worship, I guess. But at the same time, I'm hearing all this weird talk. I guess they were talking in tongues. I don't know. I was ready to walk out. And I was actually sitting next to this lady. She used to shop at the store that I work at. She led me to the Lord that night. And this was in 2002. And from that day on, I was in and out of church, 2002 till 2008. I also felt like I could still do my own thing. So I would come to church on a Sunday hungover, and eventually I would get convicted of, you need to stop. You need to stop drinking and partying and just do your thing, come to church. I would stop doing all those things, and, my kids were coming to church too, and they really liked it a lot. And then eventually I'd get the little church hurt, and I'd be out again and come back again and in and out and in and out. And there was a time where I was coming back, but I would still want to go out. So I'd put on my cross and get dressed up and go to the clubs, but I wouldn't drink. I would just go hang out and just observe everybody and actually look at them and think, is this really what it's all about, Is this the life that I want? And there was also this time in my life where my kids were coming and I wasn't. And they're like, Mom, you need to come to church. You need to come to church. And they would pray for me too. And my younger brother had asked if we can hang out one night and have dinner. And I said, yeah, come on over. So they came over. We had dinner, and he pulls out his Bible. This was, 6 years later? And at that time, I wasn't going to church anymore. So he lays his Bible on the table, and I go, I knew there was a catch to this dinner. There's always a catch. So I just listened to him, and he's all, sis, there's a heaven and a hell, right? He goes, you're heading the wrong way. He goes, you need to come back. You need to come back. Started bawling and crying, and I was like, okay. So me and my husband, actually, my husband now, went to church that Wednesday, and I rededicated my life to to the Lord. And then when I rededicated my life, my kids were in high school and they didn't want to come to church anymore, so they had stopped. And one of the pastors had asked me, where's your kids at? I don't see them on Fridays anymore. And I would say, well, I don't want to force them to come. I didn't come before, so why should I force them? They're like, oh, no. He goes, you forced them to come. So I did, and I made them come back. And they were really upset with me. Like, Mom, we just don't, really talk to those kids anymore. And, we don't feel comfortable. I'm like, you're going. And, to this day, it's the best thing that ever happened to all of us because, now my daughter's on the worship team and my son helps behind the scenes and they just love God. And seeing them love God, makes me love him even more. I haven't looked back since. I just thank God for saving me and, loving me. And there's a verse that I believe it's Matthew 18. I can't remember what verse it is, but where there's two or more gathered in his name, he's in the midst. And I believe through prayers, because my brother would always pray for me to come back to church. I believe through prayers, that's why I'm here. And I'm thankful for that.